I'll make mine fast. And before Sheila leaves, I just wanted to just say something about her. Just, we went to high school together. She was an English major. She's always the kid sitting in the front row, all the time. But I fell in love with her. And just as a side note, it's a little topic most people don't know. She was an Army brat. Her dad was in the military for 30 years. Army brat, an Army wife, and now she's an Army mom as well. Guys, so I'm going to go fast through this. I know it's been long, but before I get started, as you mentioned, pronouns are something now that people talk about when they come and speak. So my personal pronoun is fix bayonets. Okay? Sheila gets me, she goes, that's not a personal pronoun. Those are not pronouns. I said, look, if they're making all this stuff up, I get to make something up too. Okay? So let's get started. I'm going to share a little bit what we're doing at Take Charge. And again, why we're doing this. Our country is under attack internally, and in the black community especially, this has happened 60 years ago. We were the canary in the coal mines, and what we're doing, we're starting a movement that will hopefully we'll be the first ones to help turn this thing around. I have a book coming out later this year called The Prodigal Project, and we're hoping that that will ignite a fuse not only in the black community but in our entire country. So I won't go through the pillars. Basically, what we stand for is that the promise of America works for everyone, regardless of race. That the private sector is the fastest way from poverty to prosperity. But in order to play in that private sector ball field, you need a solid education. That's number 3. And we said, look, parents should have the right. If the school's not working, to opt them out, and the dollar should follow. Number 4 is that the 2-parent black family needs to be restored locally and nationally because it was destroyed in our lifetime. I'll talk about that. And then lastly, the first job for any elected official is the safety of their citizens, and that's being disregarded as well. So we talk about Black History and Black History Month. This is what the black community used to be. So I want you to think right after the Civil War, early 1900s. This is Booker T. Washington right here, and he was the first black conservative to be canceled by the left. We'll talk about that another time. But 2-parent families. There's Thomas Sowell. Over 80% of the black community with 2-parent families during the worst of times in the history of this country. During the worst of times, when there was legal discrimination and the poverty that we had during the country at the time. He wrote a book. Booker T. Washington wrote a book called The Negro Business, and he talked about between 1860 and 1900. So this is right after the Civil War, right when the slaves were just free. That 22% of them by 1900 owned their own homes. 22%. Of those 22%, 72% of them owned them outright. This is 1900. If you remember, when President Trump was president, he was going to Tulsa for an event, and the whole thing about Black Wall Street, there was rioting, and they burned down this really economic prosperous area in Tulsa. What they didn't tell you, they called it Black Wall Street at the time. What they don't tell about this story is that yes, that happened. That massacre happened and it was wrong. It's a part of our history. We own it, right? We own how well we've prospered as a country, as citizens. But what they don't tell you about the second part of the story, the black community rebuilt Black Wall Street. They called it Black Wall Street after they rebuilt it because it was big. It was built bigger and better than it was before it was burned down, when it was burned down previously. They built it bigger and better without one federal grant, without one dime from the legislature. They did it on their own. Never talk about that. They never talk about two sides of that story. Here's one thing I want to talk about before the Civil Rights Movement, and the Civil Rights Movement, I don't want to denigrate it, I don't want to disturb it, it was needed and all that, right? But before the LBJ administration and the Great Society, wages between blacks and whites the wage gap was closing. So between 1939 and 1960,
The incomes for black men went from $460 to over $3,000. That was a 568% increase. Now, income for white men, it rose from $1,100 to $5,000. It rose as well, but it grew at a slower rate, 362%. At a slower rate than black Americans. Basically, the wage gaps were closing, the market dynamics, and this whole bit, tides lift all boats. That was happening pre-LBJ administration. In fact, between 1940 and 1960, 20 years, over half of black Americans were lifted out of poverty. This is the fact. These are census data. Rarely talk about this stuff, right? In a trade magazine, and for real estate agents, they had that income had tripled from 1940 to 1950 for blacks, and home ownership, and basically this trade magazine said that black Americans are now the new middle class. That Time magazine said you can see Negro prosperity everywhere. This is 1953. Rarely, you're not going to see Nicole Hannah-Jones talk about this with her 1619 Project lie. This stuff is hidden from our kids, hidden from who we used to be. Proud two-parent middle-class families. These are the families that Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, all these guys came out of, and all the other parts, Thomas Sowell, and all those guys, right? So what happened? Everyone knows what happened with the LBJ administration. I call this the first time in American history where the federal government financially incentivized women to have children outside of marriage. When you say it like that, it sounds amoral. Because it is. The derivative of this program still exists today. We financially incentivize this more than we do two-parent marriage families, the traditional nuclear family. We saw that the marriage rates decline significantly. And I use these slides to educate people in the black community, let them know, because they don't know this stuff. Every time we present, we get people that join our movement, join what we're doing every month. New people, I've never known any of these people. I'm going to show you some of the things we're doing. Here's something that it's tragic. I call this out. It's embarrassing, but look, until you have a problem, just like an alcoholic, until you admit you got a problem, you'll never get to a solution. Some take nearly 90% in some years of non-marital birth rates in the black community. We act like this is normal. We're surprised. We look at the racial disparity. They're not racial disparities. They're two-parent disparities. Of course these kids are going to struggle. St. Paul, 90%. You don't get this information, it's like getting gold from Fort Knox. I can't get the most recent data. It ends in 2014 because they don't want to release it because they know how bad it looks. This is the underlying issue, and everything else they're doing is a flat-out lie. They're trying to hide and disguise what the symptoms are. They don't want this information exposed. All right, and we know what happens to kids that grow up. We know this because we have 50 years of data. Kids that grow up without fathers in the home. And this is regardless of race. It doesn't matter. It's the fatherless home issue. That's the biggest issue. I share this information because we know we talk about this over-policing and defund the police and all of this crap, that the reason why we have all these black men in prison is because the police are over-policing, they're targeting and they're profiling. No, that's not true. Look, this is when the AFDC program came, the welfare as we know it today. That blue line that you see, that's the rate of the FBI violent crime that they've been tracking on a national level. The fatherless home rate was increasing basically when these kids were born in the 60s and they turn 20 years old. What happens when there's no discipline, there's nothing, there's no father guidance, they become violent criminals. We saw that increase. And I can remember in 1994, when President Clinton was in office, they remember the crime bill, the $1 billion, 100,000 cops on the streets. In fact, President Biden, or Senator Biden, was the chief sponsor of this bill. 100,000 cops on the street because crime in our city has gotten so bad. The crime came first, the cops came later. So again, knowing the facts and knowing everything else, again, I share this information with our community, and this is what has happened. I call these kids, you know, I share this all the time. You know, it's, again, the kids on your left were racially discriminated because of the system, but their values and cultures and beliefs were much like ours today. The kids on your right, the disparity issue has nothing to do with their skin color. It has everything to do with they have not been socialized into the norms of our culture. And I tell people this all the time. I said, look, this is the difference between fathers, no fathers. Fathers, no fathers. If I would have walked out of my home, dressed like these guys on the right, by the time my hand hit the doorknob, my father would have yanked, only thing left would have been my hand on the doorknob. That's the difference of having fathers and no fathers. Right? And I'm not saying that this is a reflection of culture. Not personally identifying out these kids. This didn't used to be us. These are the great-grandchildren of LBJ. This is what government policies do. When they don't own up, they never look at the downstream effect because they don't care. And it's deliberate. What I found out, my short time involved in politics, I'm shocked by even the black community, the pastors. Okay, we know this is a problem. Why have there been a national issue to reverse the trend? Because they don't want to reverse the trend. My friends, that's not a left issue, that's not a right issue, that's not a Democrat, that's evil. That is an evil issue. Because as long as this remains, those guys stay in power, there's money there, there's power there, and they're willing to sacrifice these kids in order to remain in power. That's just facts, and we're going to change it. And we're doing some things to help again with that change. Let me see if this will work. We'll get some sound.
Well, my brother, been for lunch. He was in high school, a grade older than me. I said, hey, Bob, I met my wife. I'm going to marry this girl. She's just the most beautiful girl in the world. And he says, well, what's her name? So I don't know her name.
Marriage within the black community is few and far between. We collectively don't have very many examples of it.
And I think it's important in the black community that we emphasize on marriage, because what we've seen is a lot of children who grow up in single parent homes who struggle knowing what it means to be a man, especially young boys. They need to have a father figure to show them how to be a man.
Growing up to a single mother of 4, I was the only and youngest boy. We really had no firm foundation as far as marriage goes.
My strongest examples of marriage growing up was my great-grandfather, as well as my grandparents.
Growing up, I grew up in a 2-parent household with a mom and dad, 2 people who really loved each other, made sacrifices for each other, and also made sacrifices for their children.
I've seen different brothers and sisters around me who dealt with having children out of wedlock, and I've seen the many ills that came with it. And I just knew that I didn't want that a part of my life, and I didn't want to subject my children to some of the things that I had to face.
I'm very excited about being a father one day. I think opening that door after a long day of work and having my kid run up to me, saying, "Daddy's home," I think that's beautiful.
For me, it's like a new start to my last name. Although I gave my last name to a woman, it's kind of like the new beginning, to give my children a foundation that I did not have, to give them the balance of a mom and a dad.
You don't have to make the same mistakes that your father made. You can be a better person than your father was. When I raise a child, I want my child to be a better person than I am.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that marriage is easy, because it's not. But I can tell you it is worth it. The juice is worth the squeeze.
Marriage is not the end of a life. It's the beginning of a life with someone else. It's one of the most difficult things in manhood, which therefore causes you to be a better man. It allows you to graduate into manhood.
We're producing films like this almost on a monthly basis, from people that are walking in. None of these volunteers are ours. We have over 51. None of these volunteers are compensated. They don't get a penny. They're doing it because they want to help turn the culture, because they realize we've been screwed. And this is not who we were. And we're going to turn this back. And really, the premise of what we're doing is going back to our roots of faith, family, and education. That's what the culture was before it got contaminated. And so these guys are sharing this. I didn't know any of these people. Didn't know any of these people until I just started speaking truth and walking forward. And they're following and coming on board. Real quick, guys, it's important you know these issues. I'm going to share this. I share this in the community. Look, the left would tell you, look at these disparities, income disparities. Asian Americans, basically Chinese origin, Indian origin, nearly $100,000 household income, and Black Americans at $45,000. Aren't you? This is just a racist country. This is just terrible. They never show you this full picture. There's a direct correlation between fatherless homes and income. They never want to show you the full picture. It's lies by omission, and we're exposing it. Even in the Black community, I go in and I tell them, look, they know this. Look, God did not intend for women to raise children alone or to be alone, and all heads nod up and down. They don't know what to do next because they're not being shared with the right information and led in the right direction. And again, this is what we're doing. It's basic good and evil. That's basically what we're doing, and it's resonating. I won't go through all of this data. I mean, it's the same thing. Two-parent married family, Black community, $76,000. $75,000 annual income. That's middle class. But you'll never show this data. You'll never see this data broken out this way, because there is an issue that they have with the traditional nuclear family. Family matters. I tell you, they hate the nuclear family. That's communism is number one. You're not loyal to your family. You're loyal to the state. Okay. Again, you don't understand this until you get involved and you dig deeper in it. This is an organization that gives continuing credit hours. So if you're a physician, a nurse, an accountant, attorney, you need, and every year you got to get continued credit hours to keep your license active. Same thing for family counselors. This organization provides continuing credit hours for family counselors, and these professors were teaching them that the traditional nuclear family is like white privilege. And in fact, this is their language. Family privilege is a structural mechanism hidden within the white supremacist society that creates a systemic barriers to equal opportunity and justice for all families. The traditional nuclear family is now an enemy of our country, according to these people. And this is being taught for professional licenses. It's also being taught in our schools. So education matters. Again, you guys, Sheila's already done a phenomenal job in education. I'm not going to take us through there. Let me just kind of give you an idea. So we spent a lot of money to do a traditional poll, kind of just like they do in political polls, national poll. Black Americans, basically the question is, I believe that children are better off when there is a father in the home, and that the government policy should encourage two-parent homes rather than incentivizing single-parent homes. 61% of Black Americans agree. I believe public schools are successfully educating our children to read at grade level and to be proficient in math, and they're preparing them for future success. Only 27% of Black Americans agree. Now when it comes to when making decisions in your life, which of these organizations most influence you? My church at 45%, the Democratic Party at 19%, Republican Party at 14%, Black Lives Matter at 12%, NAACP at 5%, and Urban League 3%. Well, someone said to me, well, you know what, all these others, the Urban League and NAACP, they're all kind of like the Democratic Party. Yeah, it may be true, but guess what? None of them are talking about the first 2 points. None of them are promoting two-parent families or improvement in schools. Did you see the latest report in Baltimore and Chicago? 55 schools in Chicago, not one school has proficiency in math and reading. They control the schools. In fact, not just the liberal left and the Democrat, they're black too. And they got the worst schools for black kids. We got to, when this gets stuff, when you shine the truth and the light on this stuff, this changes behaviors. This changes minds. It captures hearts. Because even moms care about what their kids, their future of their kids. So this is pretty much our objective, is returning back to our roots of traditional Christian families and the traditional Christian faith. You know, not the Al Sharpton pastors that we had running around the country. All right? And basically teaching kids, look, it's okay to have kids. Just get married first. Trust me, that concept is not even being taught and shared. When we share it with our volunteers, they're shocked. What? Why? Well, that's the way it's done. It's the first time they see intact families when our volunteers show up at some of these institutions. Big proponents of school choice and returning vocational education back to high school. In fact, if I get my my chances with donors, we'd love to start a private vocational education high school, 9th through 12th grade. And this is replicated after an organization that's been doing this for 6 years in Alabama. They have a private high school, vocational education. They partner with contractors and builders and locally, renovating dilapidated old homes for 3 to 4 years, new roofs, tile, plumbing, all that. When they graduate, they're workforce ready. They have enough education to get full-time middle-class jobs, but they also get loans, low-interest loans from the local banks to purchase the homes they've been renovating in these dilapidated neighborhoods. So knocking out 3 birds with 1 stone. I think this is great to do regardless of race all across our state, to be honest with you. So something we'd love to see happen. So this is what we're doing. At Take Charge, we're the center of it. We use every channel, social media, speaking engagement, video, volunteers, publishing, all the stuff that we're talking about. And it's having an impact. These are just half of some of the members. We have a strategy meeting at a church that we go to in Brooklyn Park. Some of these guys, we have from former gangbangers to retired corporate attorneys. I mean, literally people that see this need and want to be a part of turning it around. And it's neat to see it. I'm going to share one more video, then we're going to wrap it up here, okay? One more. This is the female version of the first one.
Crisis of fatherless homes in the Black community. It's time for a radical change.
Our culture in the Black community is single mothers, absent fathers.
We had already talked about marriage, and there never really was a right situation. I thought that it had to be perfect. But being involved with this organization, kind of looking at the statistics of children that come out of these fatherless homes.
It's time to get back to basics and return to our roots, starting with marriage.
Grew up in Chicago most of my life, most of my childhood. Single mother, 3 children, all different dads. My parents were a really big influence to me on what marriage looked like. They've been married for about 40 years now. They did not come from healthy homes. They both grew up in very broken homes, a lot of like drugs and alcohol and just broken relationships, things like that. And so they always reminded us that they wanted something better.
As a child, I grew up in a married household, but my parents divorced at 11 years old. And I just remember being so confused and sad about it.
There was a lot of voices that said that like once you get married, then you're going to be just burdened down, you're in bondage, you're going to just be in chains, you're not going to have the freedom that you could have if you were just single.
Having to talk to other people around me about marriage and encouraging that in my community, specifically within the Black community, I just thought I should lead with example. And I love who I'm with. We have these beautiful children. I have a child on the way. Why would we not just do it?
Marriage, for me, has given me a sense of stability, a sense of joy, definitely, thankfulness. Once you find that person that you're supposed to marry, that God has for you, that it's totally worth it. Like, jump right in with both feet. And I would encourage women to get married, to stay married, to love God, to raise their kids if they have any, and just be a light to your family, to your community, to everyone.
We had already been together for 16 years, so I just thought, well, we're just going to pull the trigger and make it official, and nothing's going to change. was this magical feeling of, oh my gosh, this is happening. Like, on my wedding day, I just couldn't, I felt like I could not hold back the tears. I was so happy.
That young lady got married after 16 years living with that guy because she was involved with our organization. She wanted to be an example, speaking out the others. She had people at a wedding party that had never been to a wedding before. They were 30 and 40 years old. That's how you change culture, right there. Ladies and gentlemen, politics is downstream from culture. The left has been changing our culture for the last 40 years, and it's time for us to catch up. We are on the right side of this. Their change of culture has a trail of death, destruction, and blood in the streets. We see it. Ours is more wholesome. So it's easy. Once we get this message out, it's easy for people to join and be a part of this. And this is what we're doing to change hearts and minds. I'm God honored to do it. Thank you for having us. Congratulations on your 50 years here at LEA. What you're doing is making a difference. You're in the grunt work. I know it's tough, but people say, Kim, this is so bad. This is the worst they've ever been. I said, that's why they call them miracles. Okay? People need to see how bad they get. And that's right. This is why we're going to win this. Okay? They hate the truth. They only win on lies and passing marijuana laws that get people doped up so they don't know what's going on. Okay? But don't worry, we're going to win this. I can't tell you the date. I don't have the time, but we will win this. Thank you so much.